Hi, this is Liam Guillou, director, writer, and subject of my documentary, A Cursed Man, and you're listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
Welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. This podcast has existed for about 8 years now, in several different forms, and over those years I've had a wide variety of guests from the horror genre enter this graveyard, ranging from directors, producers, screenwriters, actors, composers, horror hosts, authors, convention organizers, but this podcast is a first. Because in a moment, I will be welcoming a cursed man to the graveyard. And ever since booking this interview, things have not been the same around here. You could say there's a change in the air, a weight that has suddenly appeared over the graveyard, something I've never felt before. Even the vampires, werewolves, zombies, or ghouls, as I like to call them, and the other creatures that reside here have felt this shift, and all of them have promptly vacated this area. Wait. Did you hear that? Or should I say, do you not hear that? Even the ever-present wind in this graveyard has ceased to exist. For the first time, I truly feel alone. I think I should get things moving and welcome my guests to the show. Now, normally, this would be the time when I say, as you hear in the background, a new grave is being dug. But even my trusty grave-digging team is not here. They've already dug this grave and told me they won't return until after the interview is over. So without further ado, it's time to welcome in our cursed man. And as promised, it is time to welcome in our cursed man, otherwise known as director and writer Liam Guillou, who is here to discuss his new documentary, appropriately titled A Cursed Man, which is available on VOD right now. Liam, thank you so much for joining me here on the Graveyard Show podcast.
Hi, caretaker. Yeah, it's great to be here.
So I'm just going to ask you right off the bat, what the hell were you thinking?
That's the number one question, right? What was I thinking? That's a big question. What was I thinking? And also, there were definitely moments in the film when, and I found a picture recently, actually, right after I came out of a cave in Mexico. We can dive into that in a bit in a moment. And I looked pretty shell-shocked. So yeah, there were definitely times when I didn't know what I was thinking.
I was going to say, there are moments in this movie where I'm watching you and I'm going, oh man, like it's really hitting. And you looked exhausted. You looked, I'm not going to give away stuff for people who haven't seen it yet. You definitely have gone through the ringer in this movie. I'd like to get into the process of how the film was conceived. You are a documentarian, so you decided to do this movie where you get cursed. When and how did the idea of being cursed enter your mind as a subject for this film?
Right. So the idea for the film came about probably in two places. The germ of two ideas came together. And the first was I was literally having a conversation with someone about magic and spirituality. And is there anything in magic or ESP and psi phenomena? He said, look, I don't believe in any of that stuff. It's all garbage. None of it's real. And, I thought about that and I said to him, well, would you let someone put a curse on you? And straight away he went, no way. And so that got me thinking, right? Even someone who says he's a non-believer, he wouldn't want anyone putting a curse on them. And I would say I'm a skeptic too. I think you'd have to be to go out looking for a curse. And so I figured, well, I think it's probably psychological, but what's the worst that could happen, right? Let's go find out. Famous last words, perhaps.
Yes. So you are married. So when you approached your wife and said, honey, this is what I want to do, what was her reaction?
Well, she laughed. This is definitely the sort of thing that she would probably expect from me. Look, my previous film, I went to Russia to a place called the Dyatlov Pass, and went on a 10-day snow expedition into a place where 9 hikers died mysteriously. So look, it's in sort of like my DNA, my interest to want to kind of do these sorts of stories. But putting a curse on me was probably a higher level.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the thing is though, my wife actually doesn't believe in any of this stuff. She's also very much a non-believer, and she felt like, look, nothing's going to bad is going to happen to you from a curse, was her belief. But she was concerned, like, hey, you're going to go to some pretty strange places and meet some people who have some pretty out there beliefs. She was like, if you're going to do this, just promise me you'll be careful and you'll make careful risks if there's such a thing.
Sure. Well, that gets me to my next question. So obviously you're a filmmaker, which means you have to have a crew come with you. So convincing crew members, how was it easy? Was it hard? Did anyone raise any concerns or anyone say, no, I'm good, I'll see you on the next one?
Yeah, so I think when I told my crew, I straight away I had two. Essentially, the crew for the most part was just 3 people, including me. It's a tiny crew, and I'm giving away a bit there, but it was 2 camera guys, a cinematographer Blake Horn, and another cinematographer who was a second camera for us on this, Sam Rosenthal. And the two of them are guys I trust, amazing cinematographers, have a shared love of horror movies that I have, and so we visually I knew this was going to work, but would they get on board with this? And when I first told them about it, I think much is the same response most people have about the idea of this film. They're like, that's a wild idea. And they're like, you sound crazy, but all right, let's do it. Let's go on it.
I like that. So how much detail went into planning the various ways of being cursed? Because you do, it's not just one visit you do to one person. You go through travel, you travel. Did you sit down and go, I want to start in the States and then work my way out, or the exact opposite? How did you put the idea together or planning the idea to do this?
Right. So logistically, it made sense. Like I'm based in LA now. I'm from the UK originally, but based in LA now, and it made sense for me to look around California. All right, let's see who I can meet first. So there was actually a long process of me reaching out to different covens. I met with some druids. Online. I met with other people who practice witchcraft in California, just to try and get the lay of the land. Like, would anyone talk to me about their practice? That was my biggest fear, and my biggest fear of like no one would talk to me. They closed the doors on me, and I did get a lot of closed doors or non-responses initially. I found that once I started to reach out and meet people, I was able to kind of convince them that, hey, I'm not completely insane. I am a genuine seeker for this idea of what's on the other side of this world. What is this beyond the veil that they seem to be comfortable living in, and I want to explore. And so that was my first part, start in California and talk to people. And then beyond that, it was actually a huge risk. There were countries that I was interested in, India and Mexico, in part because I've shot documentaries in those countries before, and I've seen elements of magical practice, and that's what caught my eye. And I think that goes back to my first point earlier. The second germ of the idea was I'd seen people practicing things whilst I've been on other shoots. And so this was exciting for me. I get to go back and try and find out what were they doing, what's happening there. And so some of that was born from places I'd seen magic. And then New Orleans is obviously just has this huge visual appeal to the idea of voodoo, and voodoo is so sort of well known in the US. So that was something I needed to explore. But the reality is there's magical practice in every country, in every corner of the world. And I could make this film forever and ever, looking at different practices. So, it's not by any means an endless sort of list. It's just kind of ones I had some access and interest to, and somewhere that I'd been before.
So at what point, I should say, there's one thing when you're in your kitchen going, I want to do this movie about me being cursed. And then there's the pre-production of going, yeah, we're going to do this. At what point for you making this movie did this actually become real? When it was that uh-oh moment?
Yeah, for sure. I think The first time we spoke with the witches in California, who were this wonderful Griffin and Carrie, the two sort of leaders, I think of or elders of that coven. They were really warm and receptive and fun to talk to, and it was a really great experience and great interview. But then once we got into it, and I actually said, "Hey, look, I'm looking for a curse," the suddenly their mood shifted, and it was like, hey, you're actually messing with something serious here. This could have some serious results. The mood definitely shifted down a gear, and I realized that this wasn't going to be a joke. This isn't a joke daytime TV show. I'm doing something for real, and there may be effects. But even bigger to that, a similar situation happened. We met with a hoodoo practitioner in New Orleans, and without giving too much away, but I am a cursed man, so that is the clue, right? The first of curse I get put onto me is by Sen Elias in New Orleans, and again, really fascinating, warm, friendly guy who I really enjoyed the conversation with, and then once he agreed to make a cursing for me in part around an old coffin nail and a lock of my hair and a whole bunch of other ingredients. Once he'd begun to do that, his whole physicality and his demeanor just changed so much. The mood in the room shifted, and he was working with negative, evil energy to create a curse. And I hope it comes across in the film, but everything changed, and I felt in my gut that this was changing, and maybe this is all just the atmosphere, the experience of it, and that has a psychological effect. But I felt a shift in an energy, even if
Yeah.
it's just emotional. And that point, after I did that, and I put a curse around my neck, we walked out of there, and it was, yeah, the tone had shifted. We'd stopped giggling at that point, like we were into something serious.
Well, it's interesting because it does come across. Because there are moments when I was watching it going, "Oh, something's happening here." Whether you were conscious of your facial reactions or not at the time, you can tell how it's just like, well, something just clicked that was not there a second ago, and it's really I'm sure, because it's one thing to walk into a situation, it's another thing to be put into this situation now where it's like, oh wow, this is getting really, really serious. And that's it's very interesting how things wind up, without giving anything away, things wind up coming full circle back to that moment later in the film. But there's one that really got me really kind of on edge, was when you went into the cave and you and your crew were putting your lives on the line. What can you tell us about that without ruining it for those who haven't seen the film yet?
Right. So, again, without giving too much away, yeah, I meet with a brujo in Mexico who agrees to take me to what is considered by some a very evil entity, in order to create essentially a pact with this entity to really bring down the downfall of my whole life potentially. And that sounds ridiculous when I say it back, right? Who would do this? Who would allow this to happen? I think the process of making this film began to feel like a runaway train, and this was happened. We'd found people, the excitement of finding people who would be prepared to show us this stuff. To me, I'm fascinated by the subject. This idea of seeing dark magical practice, to me, is mind-blowing. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that we managed to convince people to share that on camera. And it's something I've never seen in a film before, not in a factual film, a documentary. So to get there and to go there, that was the runaway train. We were excited by this, but once I went into there, I do not remember there being cameras filming that scene.
Wow.
This was one of the most genuine moments where I forgot where I was. I forgot what I was doing. I was entering into a very serious pact with an evil entity that this could have profound effects on my life. be it magical, be it psychological, and we can talk about that a bit later. But I think there's implications that there's a huge crossover of what those two things mean, and so there were real effects that I was potentially looking at. And yeah, as I said, I forgot the crew were even there. It was, and I'll also give you a little inside thing that no one's that I hadn't mentioned before to anyone was we do a blood pact in there. That's in the film. The blood came from a sacrificial animal, which, to be clear, I'd asked them not to sacrifice any animals on our behalf. So they found the blood from the local butcher shop or something. They didn't kill any animals on my behalf. That was an important thing for me. They agreed that they could do that. But a moment before we did that, I actually stood up and the roof of the cave was really low and I cracked my head on the ceiling. And so I actually spilled blood in that cave, my own blood, which
Wow.
actually is supposed to add more power to this. Like your own blood is like really heavy power. Actually, that isn't in the film, and I haven't said that to anyone else before.
Wow.
I'm
Well,
not sure if I was going to.
well,
but there
thank
we
you.
go.
I feel honored to hear that. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's very cool. That had to have added more to the creep factor, knowing that you hear, of all things, you crack your head open and bleeding just by standing up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everything, and again, and that goes to show, like, I wasn't really, I was a little bit disassociated from the moment. I was following through this process, and I'm not going to say it was an out of body experience, but I kind of, I kind of released myself to just be in this moment and experience what was happening. So I think there was something happening with my psychology that I was allowing myself to just go on this crazy, crazy journey. And yeah, that was maybe a huge risk. But yeah, it definitely kind of took me over a little bit.
Well, what's interesting to me is that you also edited the film. I mean, you wore a lot of hats on this movie. You edited the film,
Right.
so you're reviewing the footage that you shot. So, when were there times where it was tough to go back and kind of relive some of these, or like you just said, like you're kind of like the subject in front of the camera. Now you're behind the camera. Were there things you're like, oh, I don't remember that? Well, I mean, you just said in the cave you didn't remember, but were there other moments where you're just kind of like, wow, yeah, I don't remember any of that?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of like reaction shots of me, I didn't see because you don't see your own face, right? So
Yeah.
when I look back, and you pointed out a couple, I definitely look sheepish on a couple of moments after some of these workings because that was authentic at that point. I was in that moment, and my crew and I had this big conversations about how we wanted the film to look. We had drew on a lot of horror films for our kind of visual style,
Hmm.
but once we'd gone into the scene, I had to really trust in them and let them go because I wasn't able to direct the film when I'm in the moment because this is happening to me and I just have to be authentic. I just have to pretend they're not there. And so yeah, that was a part of it. So I got to see stuff like that in the edit. And I think, it's important. I did do the edit. And I think you're probably a bit of a crazy person if you think you can do all of these things on your own or an egomaniac. And so it was important for me. I brought on a great story producer to help me put in the moments that maybe I might have personally been uncomfortable with. So this story producer, a gentleman called Nigel Levy, who's based out of London, and he teaches people and is an exec producer on lots of big documentaries about crafting the film. So I would make cuts and I would send them to him, and I would get his honest and often harsh feedback on, look, you need more of you, like you need more of your reaction shots. I cut most of those out because I thought I looked stupid, but he was like, look, the audience wants to know what's happening to you. And so, we've got those moments back into the edit, and I think that was really important.
Well, the film is a great film. It's a very intense film, and I know that we're tight on time. So I'm just going to ask, as far as a sequel, you going to do a sequel?
People keep asking me. Look, I would love to make another film in this world to a degree, maybe a bit more heavy into the science side of ESP and psi phenomena, but I wouldn't recommend anyone gets a curse, and I certainly would not be looking to do it again.
Fair enough. Well, as I mentioned, A Cursed Man is available on VOD. Liam, if anybody wants to follow you on social media or the film.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the film, yeah, as you said, is out on VOD, and you can follow me on Instagram, A Cursed Man Film. You'll find me there. That's the place where I'm most sort of active at the moment and answering questions. And we've got some behind the scenes stuff coming up there too.
Fantastic. Liam, thank you so much for joining me here. The film is fantastic. I recommend everybody go out and check it out. Cursed Man, available now on VOD. Liam, thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on the program for your next film.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Wow, the grave digging team really wants to put this interview to rest very quickly. Well, while they're doing that, I want to again thank Liam for joining me here on the podcast. And as we've said, you can catch A Cursed Man on VOD right now. I'm going to say this. I was fortunate enough to get a screener, and I watched it, and man, it is good. It's very well put together because you have you have the science side that's mixed in with this as well. A lot of different aspects are taken into it. You know, the unknown, spirituality, the witchcraft and voodoo, and hexes and curses, as well as psychology and science. And I mean, he really packs a lot into this film. And it's really well done, and I cannot recommend this film enough. I hope it gets a lot of love, not only from the horror community to watch it, but also on the other side when we were starting to talk about documentaries getting nominated for all the different awards out there in the horror community. The wind has finally returned to the graveyard. How I missed thee. And things are starting to feel like they're getting back to normal around here, so that's good. So with that, as I begin to close down the graveyard, I'd like to tell you that the Graveyard Show podcast is available everywhere podcasts exist and can be found on YouTube as well as many other video streaming sites. Now, if you've been following the show, you've seen that I've scaled back the podcast quite a bit this year. That's because I'm really devoting more time on the Graveyard Show podcast's video channels, with the primary site being YouTube. I've uploaded a lot of content to it, and if you're a fan of horror, well, you should be definitely subscribing to the Graveyard Show podcast on YouTube. You can find movie trailers. Graveyard Show podcast is on there. The Graveyard Show classic podcasts, which contain interviews from the years 2009 and 2010, the first 2 years that this podcast existed. And in speaking of those podcasts from 9 and 10, I decided to also create a new series that you can now find called Exhuming the Grave, which features topics that I discussed on those very podcasts. It was a weekly podcast back in those days. So you can get a nice snapshot from that time period of different topics that I talked about. So the first two Exhuming the Grave episodes that I've uploaded are Remembering Robert Quarry. I have a couple of podcasts where I mention the passing of Robert, and then I give more thoughts on the following one. And then the other one is Friday the 13th's 2009 theatrical crash. I believe that's a series of 4 different podcasts in a row where you hear me discuss the upcoming release of Friday the 13th in theaters in 2009 and its subsequent number 1 position in theaters, and then within a few weeks it's literally out of the top 10. So check that out. There's going to be a lot more to come in the near future, and I can guarantee you that I have so many podcasts from those original shows that I have tons of content that I'm always going back and trying to see what I can pull from it for your listening and entertainment pleasure. You can also catch my other videos on YouTube called Catacombs of Horror, where I discuss horror movies like Halloween 4, Is Evil Dead the greatest franchise in movie history? And then I have another show called The Caretaker Reveals, where I show different horror memorabilia that I own. I kind of show you different things like the swag package from In Search of Darkness. You get to see what comes in it, as well as other videos like that as well. And then you can also see my shorts on YouTube as well. No, not my shorts. I mean my video shorts that I did on movies like Blackula and Count York. You can check those out on there as well. So there you have it. Plenty of content for you to digest, and as always, I enjoy reading your comments on there as well, and I do respond to them, and I'm pretty quick and timely in my responses. In the meantime, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again very soon, but before I go, I said before I go, I wanted to share one final thought about curses and things that are part of the unknown. There is a part of me that is curious to learn what is out there and to experience it. And then there's another part of me that doesn't want to open a door to something I'll regret. For example, there's some people out there that'll stare into a mirror and call out Bloody Mary or Candyman's name just to say they did it. But me? No, I would never do that. What if it's real? And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out, especially a cursed man. Until next time.